Would you please pray with me? Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. As much fun as it would be to preach on that gospel, that's not where we're going today. Instead, I want to tell you about the ELCA, because you are the ELCA. This week, our church, in its national expression, met in assembly throughout the whole week. I was fortunate enough to be one of the voting people of our church at that assembly of about a little bit under 1,000 voters, and to be part of all the discussions and all the wide range of experiences that we had at this week at the assembly. And so I want to come back and I want to tell you what it means to be part of the ELCA, because I have a much better grasp on it now. We in the ELCA can be expressed in three ways. The church, that's us. We are churches of the ELCA. The next expression up is synods. We are synods. We are here in the Southwest Pennsylvania Synod. That is our synod. We are that synod. And then there's the ELCA nationally. And this week we met nationally and all got to see each other's faces from across the country and meet and talk about many of the important things that our church does as people of God. And I want to tell you about that. And so Stacy actually gave me this idea of ordering last night as I was trying to think about exactly how I'd present this amazing week. She said I should do it in order like we do when we go to youth stuff. Highlight, low light, God light. So that's what we're going to do. Although pastors aren't very well at being contained to just one of those things, which I yell at the kids about all the time. So I'll start with low lights. I'll start with a couple flippant ones, and then I'll come to a serious one a little later. But you see my coffee mug here, right? Well, it's practically sacramental for us Lutherans to have coffee, right? My coffee mug this week was often like this, though. Well, there wasn't paper in it, but it was empty. It was often empty this week. Sadly, there wasn't very much coffee to be found at the convention center throughout the week because there's some sort of, I heard, there is a debate between who could provide coffee and who couldn't, according to the union at the convention center. And so we only had a 2-hour window every day when coffee was made available for the whole group that was there. And so us Lutherans had to work through this week, in general, without coffee. My second kind of funny moment of sadness this week, or of low light. So one of the great things about the assembly is they had everyone use iPads for the whole week. So 1,000 people all used iPads rather than these huge big binders of millions of sheets of paper that they have historically used. I think at one point they said they saved 500,000 sheets of paper by everybody using iPads. So it was this great step forward, which of course I loved, of using technology, moving away from old books, and we were all technological. I read a lot of my books on my Kindle, on my iPad. So we had a big banquet dinner on Friday night, and there was really nice little gifts there to every voting person who was part of the week, from Wendell August here. And I open it up, and what is my gift? It's a bookmark. I cannot figure out how to fit it in this thing, though. Where does this go? That's kind of funny, but ironic. Well, let me tell you about this week. A number of things happened. Last week before I left, I told you the big thing would be the election of a bishop, and we did that. And I actually have video, which is why the screen's up here, so I could show you what our bishop, our new bishop-elect looks like, and hear her speak a little bit. She is very, very impressive. The second major thing that kind of happened this week was we had the election of a secretary for the church. It's hard for me to get really psyched about the secretary of the national church because the secretary just does stuff that I have no gift for, and like numbers and order, and I like order, but I'm not really a detail-oriented person. And our church this week elected former Bishop Chris Berger, who, when he spoke, was very, very eloquent and will be a great leader of our church. That's a 6-year term that we have elected him to, or called him to. And so he is our new secretary of the ELCA. A great guy. Probably the most major thing that happened, other than the election of the presiding bishop, was a social statement on criminal justice. It was about 38 pages long, and I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but it was adopted overwhelmingly. And what it did was recognize very openly the brokenness of our criminal justice system. And this couldn't be much more apparent than what's happened over the last few weeks and really years. I mean, that all of us know the brokenness of this system and the way it doesn't work all the time. And so this statement, among many things, recognized the brokenness for people who are in prison, who are on the persecuting side, those who are on the receiving side. It was a very overwhelming document that talks about all of the brokenness in the situation and God's hopefulness. And at the end, there are a number of resulting statements that we intend to do something about it. And again, I won't read all those to you, but if you have time and you're interested, it's on the ELCA's website. It's a social statement on criminal justice. It was a great document that we stood behind very strongly as a whole church this week. On the last day of assembly, we made great strides for statements of peacefulness for our brothers and sisters in Israel and Palestine. It was a great conversation as a church when people came up to speak at the microphones of sensitivities and awareness for the war and the awfulness conflict that happens in the Middle East. And we took great statements again to stop that and to be advocators for peace in the world. There was a lot of young people at the assembly this week, a lot of young people. And when I say young people, I mean there were a number of people just slightly older than our acolytes here this morning, voting people there. There was a number of people of the millennial age group, that's 18 to 35-year-olds. And they weren't just there, they were present. They were voting people. They were active at the microphones. They were active in all aspects of the assembly. And that was a really amazing part to experience and to see that active nature, a strong conversational piece throughout the assembly. The recognition of the different places disabled people come from in our church was also recognized very openly. One of the big things that the assembly did was institute a 25th anniversary of the ELCA campaign. Happy birthday, ELCA, too, not just Francis. We're 25 years old this year, and one of the primary things was to do a capital campaign to advocate for this 25th anniversary over the next 5 years. And there were special allowances made to invest in our young people and in the disabled people in that document. A very substantial statement made there, which was just amazing to see. One of the coolest parts of the assembly is when all of our interfaith and inter-Christian brothers and sisters come up and have space to speak or just be recognized. For the first time ever at an ELCA convention assembly, one of the members of the Sikh community came and spoke. And one of the most powerful points of his presentation was, after the bombing last year in Wisconsin, the first letter of recognition and condolence and solidarity that came to his desk was from our presiding bishop, Mark Hansen. The ELCA, were the first to stand there in solidarity with our Sikh brothers and sisters. And stories like that from our Jewish brothers and sisters, many other churches around the world were there. Some of them spoke in person, and others were just there in representation. Powerful, powerful moments. And so I said I would talk about this bishop election, right? The bishop election. It was an amazing experience to be part of. 5 ballots happened. The first one is an ecclesiastical ballot, which is anyone who's there can write down the name of a Lutheran pastor they know. I wrote down myself. No, I didn't write down myself because I have no. So they take all the people that have been voted on the first ballot, and there's an opportunity to say, no, I don't feel called to do this ministry, and to have your name taken off for future ballots. But if you don't buy the second ballot, you're in it. And so a number of people were removed after the first ballot, and the second ballot is another ballot like that where you can write anyone that was on the first ballot that still has their name in it. And after that ballot, it gets whittled down to 7 people for the third ballot. And of the 7 people, 3 of them were removed immediately. Apparently they didn't know they were on the ballot in the first place or had been voted in. A couple of scholars of our church, and they asked to be removed. And what was left, the 4 people that were left for that third ballot, was our presiding bishop, Mark Hansen, who has been our bishop for 12 years, 2 terms. It was voted in 6 years ago. And then a bishop from Montana, Jessica Christ, bishop from Minnesota, Ann Svenningson, and bishop from northeastern Ohio, Elizabeth Eaton. And they all had opportunity to speak, answer some questions that the assembly had asked of them. And then we voted on the 3 of them, the 4 of them, to take it down to 3. Bishop Ann Svenningson was the one that was removed at that point, and so it left the 3 of Bishop Eaton, Bishop Christ, and Bishop Hansen. Again, they spoke. Again, we voted on the 4th ballot, and that took it down to 2. No election was made, and that left Bishop Hansen and Bishop Eaton from Ohio left. And on the fifth ballot, in a quite overwhelming nature, Bishop Eaton was elected as our presiding bishop by a vote of 600, I think, to about 200. She got a substantial amount of the vote, 600 to 280, something like that. And so I want to give a little space for you to see and experience our new presiding bishop-elect. She won't take over as presiding bishop until October or November when she's installed in Chicago. But I was very struck by her. When the time came for her to actually speak, I had not heard of her before, but it was very apparent, and I shared, I think, obviously, the movement of the assembly, that after we heard her speak and heard them speak, she became quickly the one that was the leading vote getter. And I'll admit, I was one of the ones that was voting for her after I saw her speak. She really impressed me. And so this is the larger 5-minute speech here. I guess I'll talk about my lowlight before I'll hold some suspense here for a minute. One of the moments I had that my true lowlight throughout for the week was as they were speaking, our presiding bishop, who has been a very faithful steward of the gospel for 12 years and had been reelected, as I said, 6 years ago, was speaking also at these moments and giving his vision and answering these questions for our church. And his big motto for our assembly was always being made new. And I couldn't help but be struck by the irony of our great Bishop Hansen, who has been doing a great job leading, but clearly the Holy Spirit was moving the church in a different direction. And after the vote started leading towards Bishop Eaton, it was an ironic moment, and so I took this picture from my seat of this great line that he has proposed for us, always being made new. And he was speaking, and it was clear a different direction was being made, and I felt the sadness for him, no doubt, that he still felt called to presiding bishop, allowing himself to be in the election, yet the assembly moving a different direction, and our church, us, moving a different direction. And so I felt sadness for our brother, as he's been a great, faithful person. So that was my low light, because he's a very good leader. All right, let me see if I can bring up here. So here's after the questions, there's a 5-minute opportunity for each of the candidates to speak about themselves and about the church. So here's Bishop Eaton, before she was elected as bishop-elect, speaking
Bishop
in her 5 minutes.
just said that she'd like to have a beer with us, and so I think we're going to be leaving in a few minutes, and we'll have a... In 2009, this church took a very important and momentous decision, which turned out to be a very costly decision. I happen to think it was the right decision, but I think we've not yet had a chance to grieve the loss that we experienced before we move on to hope and renewal. So to all of our rostered people, all of you who are still members of the ELCA, I thank you for your faithfulness when so many decided that they could no longer remain a part of this body. One of the consequences, or the part of the collateral damage of 2009, is that the culture of distrust, what Rafael Mapica Padilla likes to call the hermeneutics of suspicion, have infiltrated our dear church. We saw that a little bit when we were so concerned about folding ballots. We all of a sudden had the discussion about hanging chads here in this room. Our dear church is at a point where maybe we don't trust each other as much as we could or should. So my prayer is that in the days and weeks and years to come, as God gives us that time and that grace, we might grow to trust each other and to see in one another a brother and sister, someone for whom Christ died, a sinner just like everybody else, but also someone redeemed, and now someone who is a son or a daughter of the Most High. We need to start to trust each other. It's us, for heaven's sakes. We're not the government. We talk about being an inclusive church, and I think that's a good and wonderful thing. Bishop Hansen has worked hard and courageously to make sure that all are welcome, but I want to make sure that what we said in 2009, that those who, by their scriptural and confessional convictions, believe that that decision was not the correct one, that those people also have a voice in this church. We need to make room for those who do not agree with us, but who do agree upon the cross. And I think we need to reclaim our status as aliens in America. When we came over here in ethnic waves in the 1700s and the 1800s and the 1900s and now in the 2000s, we often settled into specific language groups and we didn't speak English. So all of you people worried about Spanish people not speaking Spanish, I've got congregations who still have services in Finn, Swedish, Slovak, and German. So they'll get the hang of this. But we were protected from the overwhelming American, Reformed, evangelical, Protestant culture. Now we need to reclaim that heritage that holds up a theology of the cross and a culture of glory, that holds on to the two kingdoms, which says no earthly government can claim to be the new Jerusalem, that says that ambiguity is possible so long as we agree on Christ and Christ crucified, that there is law and gospel, that we are simultaneously sinner and saint, and that we are bound so that we can be set free in our obedience to serve the neighbor. We need to hold on to that. That is not the American Protestant message. We have a gift to give to the rest of the church, and we need to reclaim that. And when it's all said and done, all we have is not some killer app or some great program. All we have is Christ and Christ crucified. That doesn't look like a lot to the whole world, but think about those who held on to the promises of God. Think of David when he faced Goliath. What did Goliath say? Really? The lions when they saw Daniel. Really? Institutional racism when it saw Martin Luther King Jr. Really? The Liberian warlords when they saw Lema Mbowe. Really? Death when it saw Jesus on the cross. That's all you got? A suspicious and frightened culture when it sees us. Really.
That's a little glimpse at our presiding bishop-elect, Bishop Eaton. There's more video around if you are interested in looking on the ELCA's website. This wasn't question-answer, sorry. Yes, she did have time to prepare that speech. They were asked prepared questions from the assembly, and then they were asked unprepared questions. And actually, my real highlight was actually a question she answered without preparation. But the videos are messed up on their website, and it snipped off her response. She gave a response right before the third ballot about, I can't remember exactly what the question was, but she gave this amazing response about the way in which she and Bishop Hansen and Bishop Svenningsson and Bishop Christ cared for one another in this process. And it wasn't a debate or this competition between the four of them about their real, true, mutual love and respect for one another and hope for the church. And it was a tear-jerking moment for me because that's exactly the reason why I thought the 1,000 of us were there for the church. The reason why we gather in this community for our care and love for each other and for what God's doing in the world. And she articulated it so brilliantly. It was a moment for me that's like, she gets it. And the other ones, not that they didn't get it, but she used that response in that moment was really special. But yes, that one was prepared, the 5-minute speeches. So that was my big highlight. It was close with that and the 1,000, I'll get this right, 1,000 dozen donuts that our synod, or not donuts, cookies, our synod made for the, because we had to have a cookie table to represent Western Pennsylvania at this. So our synod made 1,000 dozen cookies. Donuts, cookies. So highlight, low light, and it always is about the God light, right? That's always the most important thing. Where is God at in whatever it is we're doing? And God, of course, is laced in that. It would be foolish to try to take God out of any of that. God could not have been any more obviously in everything that I've told you or showed you. But I've missed out I have not spoken yet of perhaps the most important thing about our church-wide assemblies, and that is worship. There's something that is indescribable. I can't tell you how amazing this experience was. I couldn't show you video because it would pale in comparison to actually being there. But there's something about over 1,000 to 1,300 of people, Lutherans, all gathering in a space like the David Lawrence Convention Center and singing hymns together and worshiping together, all receiving communion together. And in particular, another one of those tear-jerking moments for me was the very first worship service where I was caught in the immensity of this. A number of leaders had already come into the space, and they were flying these really beautiful banner kinds of things. And I leaned over to the guy beside me and said, "Where's the cross at?" Because we were singing one of my favorite hymns, and all of a sudden from our one side entering in through the space was the cross. And it was so amazing because it was all on a flat space, so you couldn't see most of the leadership positions, and you couldn't see the leaders coming through, but you could see that cross. And it was amazing to watch the whole congregation of the church represented there, all orienting themselves to that cross as it came into the space and centered itself right by the baptismal font. It was a moment that was just beyond description, and so I won't try to say any more about it because I can't say enough about it. But God was there. God was there this week in our church, and we were there together as the church doing God's work. And so I'm excited to continue to be part of the church and be part of what God is doing here in Aliquippa as the ELCA representatives for our area. Let us pray. Loving God, we give you thanks for the church. It's broken, has warts, has viruses and illnesses and sicknesses, and causes damage sometimes, but it's also beautiful. It's something that you're always making new. It's something that has the potential to change the world. Help us to live into that change. Amen.